Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me. And Joe, it's an emergency episode. Hubert Davis has been fired at North Carolina. If you follow, college basketball journalists or stuff like that online, it became pretty evident that this was most likely going to happen. We even did our coaching carousel video yesterday at the time of filming this, and we said, look, this is probably going to happen. It's going to be another video. Posted that today at noon, and now we're doing this late at night on Tuesday. But a couple hours ago, the news has broke that Hubert Davis is out at North Carolina. Joe, wanted to get your initial thoughts on that.
You know, kind of maybe this was in the works behind the scenes for a while because the press conference he gave in hindsight last Thursday was pretty unusual. And to see it unfold now 5 days later on this Tuesday night, you know, kind of just a downward spiral for Hubert Davis ever since that NCAA Final Four win against Duke, ever since that halftime, I think UNC fans would kill to go back to that halftime when they were up on Kansas because ever since then, I know they were the one seed and won the ACC in 2024, but they bow out to Alabama that year. Last year, they don't really deserve to be in the NCAA tournament, get eliminated round of 64, and then this year, it looks like for a while tides turn, right? They suffer a few brutal non-con losses, like one to Michigan State, but then they turned around. They hit that buzzer beater against Duke, and with Caleb Wilson, Seth Triple, Visa, you're like, all right, these guys might have something, but the Caleb Wilson injury does them in. They never really recover. Another round of 64 exit. And Sean, let's be honest here. If Duke wasn't succeeding at the clip they've been ever since Coach K retired, I guess that first year they both underperformed by Duke and Carolina standards. I'm talking 22-23. But by 23-24, Duke's made it further now in three consecutive tournaments. Looks like John Shire is going to repeatedly have a powerhouse there based on initial returns. And I think UNC boosters definitely saw the writing on the wall, which is why they parted ways in air quotes.
Yeah, I'm a little bit shocked that it all sort of fell apart really quickly. Joe, Hubert's one of their guys, and he was hand selected by Roy Williams to take over. And like you said, he takes over, and it's him versus Coach K for 1 year. They're a bubble team for 90% of the season, and they win at Cameron Indoor in Coach K's last game on the final day of the regular season. And then they lose in the ACC tournament semis, and they go to the Final Four, which they retire Coach K again. We have to remember that they weren't good for a lot of that season, and they got it together late, and of course they deserve credit from that. And then they probably should have won the national championship, like you said, 14-point lead at half, I think, or 15. They ultimately don't win that. Going into year two, Joe, they are the number one team in the country preseason. They have a tough non-conference. They missed the NCAA tournament. The following year, they make some nice transfer portal ads like Cormac Ryan from Notre Dame. They win the ACC. They win. They get to the Sweet 16. And then the last 2 years, as you mentioned, got into the tournament when they didn't deserve to, and then limped into the tournament after they lost their best player. So I'm a little bit surprised that it did fall apart this quickly. 2 weeks ago, Joe, this was not even possible. And I think the manner of their loss to VCU really matters. They had that game won. They're up by 19 points in the second half, and they did not get across the line. But it looked like it wasn't going to be that big of a coaching carousel this year, Joe. Well, without a doubt, a top five job has opened here. There's a potential for another one. We'll see about that. But all of a sudden, we have a job where I think you could argue that it could be anywhere in the top five. But before we get into the candidates, where do you think in the year 2026 does the North Carolina job rank compared to the others in the country?
I still think it ranks extremely high shot. I know a lot of people are detractors, whether that's Carolina detractors or just in general for the ACC, are saying, look at, some of the past national champions, right? Like Florida. I think they're actually more of a basketball school than football school. What's the SEC? So football remains king, but they won it last year. UConn, I think, is the most underrated brand in college basketball, but a lot of people kind of the blue blood mentality, the Carolinas, Kentucky's, Dukes of the world, still view them as an inferior blue blood. But the reason I'm making these points to you, Sean, is that's what the detractors are saying. Oh, well, you could win anywhere with money. UNC has plenty of money. They have the brand. They have the Jordan brand, obviously. I think that's the Tar Heel blue is the strongest brand in basketball. I mean, we grew up with it. North Carolina's one. I mean, no matter what era you've been in, Sean, you've been alive probably for a North Carolina national title or two or three. So this is as strong a brand as ever. I'm just fascinated to see like how the athletic department comes together. There's been a lot of word on turmoil just in the athletic department in general. They've recently hired a new football coach in Bill Belichick. And what's interesting, Sean, is we've seen two blue bloods open in the last 2 years. Kentucky and Indiana in somewhat of a similar situation, right? Like a beloved son comes home, not necessarily handpicked, and then kind of a unfortunate turn of events, and Mike Woodson goes. But I think it's safe to say both those hires haven't necessarily worked out quite yet. Indiana, it's still too early with Coach DeVries, barely missing the tournament year one. But Mark Pope, I promise you, Kentucky fans aren't too happy. I don't think they're necessarily as negative on him as Carolina fans have been on Hubert lately. But the reason I'm saying all this, Sean, is they have to get this right. Pressure is going to be immediately high year one, and God help them if they don't have a plan right now.
Yeah, and we don't know, right, Joe? Like you said, with both Kentucky and Indiana, they, you can argue how far down the actual coaches ended up being, but they were certainly not in the top five of either list. You know, Pope was, and the Kentucky search was extremely public. Like every time somebody went to that campus to interview or whatever, it was pretty well known. Indiana was a little bit less so, and DeVries did sort of break, like it materialized pretty quickly. I think you know we're linked with him on one day, and then the next day he was the coach. So I do think this job might be a little bit, or this search might be a little bit like those, Joe. This thing did get going pretty quickly. I think agents are always talking to ads, but I would be shocked if they have like a hand picked guy already. I really would, because I think they're going to try and shoot for the stars, and I think they're going to end up in the clouds, and they're going to have to take somebody. But let's get on with some candidates here. We have some. I have three tiers. I have wish list slash no way, my short list, and then outside the box. Let's get let's get into the no way category first. I think they can waste their time calling these people, but they're not. They might get an answer out of respect, but they're not going to say yes. Let's go with Jay Wright, Dan Hurley, Brad Stevens, Dusty May, Todd Golden, TJ Otzelberger, Tommy Lloyd. Any other names you want to add into the no way bucket?
This will spur an argument right away. Sean Billy Donovan. I
Okay,
don't see
yep.
it happening. I have no doubts Kentucky or Indiana or maybe even a Michigan 2 or 3 years ago made a shadow reach out to Billy Donovan and his agent. I think Kentucky, he was an assistant under Rick Pitino there, didn't have much interest 2 years ago. Don't think with the way this college basketball brand has gone that he's going to be interested right away. Maybe this is on freezing cold takes a little while later, but I still think he's in that category, Sean.
It's an awfully interesting one. And Joe, right before we clicked record, I was watching Goodman on Field of 68, and they spent a lot of time talking about Billy Donovan. He has never really shown an interest in returning to college before. He has certainly been asked, definitely by both Kentucky and Indiana. Um, there is a little bit of a story today that he might want to leave the Bulls because they stink. I think my after seeing that, I think it's from 0 to 1%. Like I think they're gonna try, but we do have to remember, Joe, that he is not. He reportedly left college because he was fed up with recruiting. Well, that is now times 100 with the NIL and the portal. So, is there a way that they can get somebody else, behind him who's more familiar with that? Maybe, but I did have him on the outside the box bucket because obviously everything that I just said. But yeah, he is probably the one NBA name that I would say that they're going to try and get right now. But in terms of the no way bucket, anybody else you want to throw in there?
Outside of
Like Mark Few, maybe too, I guess.
yeah, Mark Few, do you threw Tommy Lloyd in there, right, Sean?
Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
there's going to be a few more. I don't want to say no way on a few of them. A lot of these candidates we're going to bring up that are good to the public ear. I'm going to tell you why some of them might be drawbacks. Not because they wouldn't work there, but because, it might not even work out that they can get there. And we'll explain some of that uh, kind of as we go on here, Sean. But all good on my part there.
Okay. Let's go to the realistic short list. We can go back and forth, Joe. Number one, I'm throwing out there, and if I had to guess today who the next coach of North Carolina is, I think it's going to be this guy, Mark Byington at Vanderbilt. Was the coach of James Madison for a couple of years, did a terrific job, has done very well at Vanderbilt in the past couple of years. He is number one on my short list right now.
I think he's number one on what I think is going to happen. I think North Carolina definitely is going to go for the dream candidates we just mentioned. Another name, Sean, that could be pretty interesting is Fred Hoiberg, right?
Okay.
Now, he played at Iowa State, I think, kind of like Dusty May, Todd Golden, and Tommy Lloyd. Tommy Lloyd spent all of his career on the West. Dusty May grew up Big Ten country, stayed in Big Ten country. Fred Hoiberg, though, he's not a stranger to exploration. What I mean is he was very successful at his alma mater, Iowa State. Took the Chicago Bulls job, ended up back in college. Don't think he is unhappy by any means in Lincoln, but I bet if his agent gets a call, he definitely thinks about it. Now he's not going to be thinking about it hopefully for the next 48 to 96 hours because he's going to be trying to get Nebraska to a Final Four. But I think you would get kind of the gears going in his head, right? Nebraska's going to graduate a lot of that core right now. And, I think his son is in his last year too, right, Sean?
Yep.
So maybe this could be the changing of the guard for him. Another one here, and, maybe this is an extremely out of the box candidate. Mike Malone, the ex Denver Nuggets head coach. I've seen that in a few articles. I know his daughter is an athlete at UNC. That could be kind of a Pete Carroll-esque hire, not necessarily an old guy. I think he's only in his 50s. Won an NBA title with the Denver Nuggets only less than 3 years ago, and certainly might not be the traditional hire, but that would be a splash. Any guy who's won an NBA title certainly might attract some, and especially with the personnel he might bring in terms of a GM, talent acquisition with UNC. I think that could be an outside the box candidate as well, Sean.
All right, let's go back to my realistic bucket. Number two, and if you're listening to this, Mike, cover years, I think Scott Drew should be in the
Ooh.
running for this. He was extremely close to taking the Kentucky job. His whole family went out to Lexington. Apparently, they didn't like it a whole lot, so he pulled the plug. But things have cooled off a little bit at Baylor, both on the court and off the court, and they are, pushing a rock uphill there in terms of NIL, and they haven't had a great last 2 seasons. I think, Scott Drew's a national championship winning coach. He was at Baylor forever. Does he think about potentially switching out the green and yellow for Carolina blue?
I don't think so. And I don't think and again, when I say I don't think so, it's just a fit thing for me. I think he knows at Baylor he is an
Yeah, he
all-time
can.
legend there.
Yeah, he can go there. He can coach there until he dies.
Exactly. And I don't think necessarily maybe his family was a factor in not taking the Kentucky job, but the way all these jobs have ended recently for Blue Bloods, right? It's ended with two prodigal sons in a way in Woodson and now Hubert Davis going out in a bad way. And at Kentucky, a guy who won a national title, went out in a bad way too, and like half the fan base for now doesn't like him. I'm sure they'll come around like they
Yeah.
did for Rick Pitino at some point. But the bottom line is, Sean, I think Scott Drew is pretty respected in the industry because he talks to a lot of people in the industry. I don't think he's going to make a move like that. I don't think he wants to. I don't think it should tarnish his legacy, but have a move that would tarnish his legacy at Baylor.
All right, who's up next for you, Joe?
All right, Sean, up next for me, and this one I'm going to immediately tell you the drawback is Nate Oates. Now, there were a lot of rumors when Kentucky opened up and then when Nate Oates signs the extension that the reason he didn't do it is because that was interconference. Now, this is not interconference, and UNC Alabama to UNC, there's a clear upgrade in terms of basketball brand. Now, Nate Oates has a ridiculous contract, and I believe the buyout is in the range of 15 to 19 million dollars. So does UNC really want to foot over 25 combined million dollars to buy out Hubert and just get Nate Oates on a plane to Chapel Hill? I don't know. I really don't know that, Sean, but I think it's realistic because if Nate Oates is going to leave Alabama to take another college job, this would be the one. So that's the only reason I'm putting it out there.
I slightly disagree. I think that if he does leave, I think it'll be for another job that might open that has the color blue in it, a little bit of a darker blue, and potentially plays at an arena that's nicknamed the Fog. But I don't know if it's the best fit for Nate Oates. I think the off the court stuff is going to turn off some of the wine and cheese crowd. Like, he is not. I think he's done a good job of handling it, but it's happened under his watch, and there's been a couple of incidents. And then the buyout too, Joe, and you're talking about they are going to be buying out Hubert Davis, no matter what the wording is. They might be having to buy out their football coach soon. I just think it is a tall task. It's going to be asking a lot of the donors to get all that and then put together a package that's worthy of him going there with 12 to 15 million. I think he's probably in my no way bucket. I actually did forget to say him, but man, if they could get him, what a great hire that would be. All right, up next, Joe. I think there's one more power conference coach that I head coach that I have, and he it's a little bit of recency bias, but how about the guy who's won the most basketball games of any coach in any level the past couple of years? He did just bring his Iowa Hawkeyes to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 17 years, but does Carolina try and strike the iron while it's hot with Ben McCollum?
I don't think so. I don't think culturally that's a fit. Spoiler alert, my candidate also shares that state next in TJ Otzelberger, but focusing on Coach McCollum here. I don't think he has a proven enough track record to the wine and cheese crowd in the sense that, UNC, they want to be hiring the cream of the crop. And in Mark Byington's case, it's more realistic because he played at Wilmington, has success more around that area in James Madison and now in Nashville and Vanderbilt. But Coach McCollum, they could just be worried that, maybe this is a UNC similar story, right? A team that was good, floated around the bubble, and now is in the Sweet 16. I don't know if UNC boosters are really going to go for that. And I think this is a job where they're going to have to try to align everyone at once because I think right now it's pretty fractured between boosters, athletic department, and the other power brokers in Chapel Hill.
So let's talk about odds, Joe, because I don't know. In he Carolina Finns are certainly pushing for him. I just don't know if, like, he's had the opportunity to leave there before. He has the thing going at Iowa State. Like, I think it might be another situation of like he's a legend there, and he was an option for Indiana and Kentucky. Didn't even have anything. He told his agent, "I don't want anything to do with them. Don't even answer the phone." So I think there would have to be a little bit of a change in heart in just a year and 2 years from Kentucky, where he would have to basically go against everything that has happened the past couple years for him to go all the way to North Carolina. But again, he's like Oates. If you can get him, I think he is probably one of the top two or three coaches in the country. He turned that thing around at Iowa State fast. He's got them competing for national titles. I just don't know if, the. I just don't know if he'd want to do it, honestly.
I think I agree with everything you said, Sean, but I thought the same thing for a very long time about Matt Campbell. Now he clearly went to a Midwest powerhouse in Penn State,
It's a
and
little.
this is entirely
Yeah.
it's a lot different, but eventually, like in my heart of hearts, and maybe in TJ Otzelberger's heart of hearts, if you really did a psychoanalysis of him, I don't think his end job is at Iowa State. It could be in the NBA. I just don't think it's at Iowa State. And man, like, I think he's still young. He's still got a lot of time, but how often is an opportunity like this going to come around? Now, I think it's kind of biased right now because, oh, maybe Kansas could come open, maybe this job, and, oh, guys could always go to the NBA and blah, blah. it's still North Carolina, Sean. That's the factor that we have to consider here too.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a main. Whoever they get, like how big is the Tar Heel Blue really mean? Is it a top one or two job in the country? If they get Otzelberger or Oates, I would argue that it is. But if they end up going with somebody else, I would think it's probably not a top three job. But look, Kentucky, I would say Kentucky, Duke, Carolina, the top three jobs in the country. Kentucky struggled with a search a couple of years ago. I don't know. I think I wouldn't, even if UNC does struggle a little bit here and has to go down the list. I don't necessarily think that means it's a bad job. It's just a little bit of tough timing. All right, Joe, we've thrown out a lot of names. I'm going to throw out one here, and this is a little bit time sensitive because he's extremely likely to be the next Boston College head coach. But you talk about one of the disciples, probably the best assistant coach in the game right now. That is Luke Murray from UConn. He has been there with Hurley since the Wagner days. He has had a number of opportunities to go be a head coach elsewhere, including where I went to school, which is also where he went to school, by the way, at Fairfield. But he is stuck by Hurley. He had an opportunity to go to Xavier. He didn't. Obviously, UNC, it would be a huge risk to hire somebody without any head coaching experience, but they just did that 5 years ago. So obviously, if Luke Murray gets hired at BC, throw this conversation out the window. But eventually, Luke Murray is going to be a head coach somewhere.
Yeah, I just do not see UNC going for that at all, Sean. I know you're not suggesting that either. I think a more realistic option out of the box is what we talked about yesterday, Coach McDermott from Creighton, right? There's a guy like that, and we saw my alma mater do it for football, the older coach style. Now, ideally, everyone knows what UNC would want to do for that type of hire. They'd hire a Jay Wright or a Jay Wright type or a Billy Donovan type versus a Coach McDermott type. But I'm saying that type of hire is more realistic because they're definitely going to be prioritizing head coaching experience. I think UNC keeping it in the family might be important, but I
Might
think
be
they're
hard,
fresh
though.
out of I think they're fresh out of options for
Yeah.
that meets their criteria. You're gonna have to you can't like they're pretty much like they think it's a limitless buffet. It's not. It's you're on a quota right now, and unfortunately for them, they're going to have to choose between experience and UNC family. And at this point, the boosters are going to argue that experience is going to matter a lot more than the UNC family aspect.
When it comes to the family, Joe, there's not much. There's two head coaches who have been fired, and that's Jerry Stackhouse and Wes Miller. They're not going to. They might be in Chapel Hill next year, maybe as assistant head coaches or something. Um, Now there's some real outside the box in the family names like Kenny Smith being thrown around. Psycho T, Tyler Hansborough has been around that program a lot, but if they had to go with somebody with remote ties to UNC, it's hard to really see any of them.
Yeah, all are extremely unrealistic. And
If
Sean,
if they do, let's say, give Kenny Smith the head coaching job, another head coach is coming behind him as the associate head coach. Whether it's somebody like Greg McDermott or somebody who was fired, even somebody from the lower levels who can get a higher salary to be the AHC. Like that is how something like that could work. I just don't see it. There's been a lot of these old NBA guys without any college experience. Your program had it. My program had it. We have Memphis currently going through it right now and plenty of others too. But yeah, I don't see that. I think they would have to get really desperate to do something like that.
I agree, and I don't think they'll quite get to that level of desperation. There will be plenty of coaches who would walk on broken glass to go to this job. I don't think they're necessarily going to be simping for this job the way we saw some football jobs this fall happen and the way we've seen other college basketball jobs. And the timing of this shot's interesting because it's Tuesday before the Sweet 16. Obviously, we have the Elite Eight the following days after. Agents' phones are going to be ringing. And I hate saying this, Sean, one last name I forgot to mention. I don't think it's going to happen. Grant McCaslin's name is going to be thrown in here.
Yeah,
But he's a
it's
West Texas guy. I just do not see it. Like, the problem is, Sean, all these like guys that you could pencil in for the job just in terms of trajectory, they have too strong a regional ties to their area. Now we've seen plenty of coaches betray that, but it's more rare that they'll do it now than ever before, especially if you're at a place like Texas Tech with those resources. But Sean, I guess I'd ask you this: if not Byington, who else would be your prediction?
Here's a name that might not be number two, Joe, but I do want to throw it in the mix. It's a little bit out there, but it is somebody with a lot of head coaching experience nearby. Bob Ritchie from Furman. He is a young up and comer. Has won a ton of games there. We just saw him go toe to toe with Dan Hurley a couple days ago in the round of 64. This year's Furman Paladins team, Joe, is his worst team that he's had. He's been in the top 100 in Ken Palm every single year since the first couple. If there's an up and comer that can make the jump, it might be him. But other than that, I think Byington is choice number one. Well, not choice number one, realistic choice number one. And then Scott Drew, um, maybe McCollum, Hoiberg, Ritchie. Like, maybe that's my five.
Go, actually, I agree with
We're gonna do
Byington
a
number
post with
one.
it. We're gonna do a post for
Yeah.
this too.
Yep. And I'll tell you mine. Byington one, two, Olselberger. I think that has a real chance more than anything. But it's going to depend on Iowa State too. That's what's unpredictable
Yeah,
here. Luckily, the
they
portal,
go to the Final Four, Joe. That might be out.
yeah, and luckily for UNC, the portal's not opening till April 7th. Now you could declare your intentions, but portal's not open till the 7th. But you all know how that game works. They have to act quick.
And there's also some
Ols-
players on this team, Joe, that I think that the new coach is gonna want to keep.
1,000%. But I'd go Byington, Olselberger. Three, I'm going to throw a wild card out here. Three, Ryan Odom from Virginia. I doubt he does it, but if they're going to do an intra-conference villain, Lane Kiffin style,
If he was still at VCU, Joe, he would be number one by far.
yep. And maybe, if I bet he's happy in Virginia. He clearly did very well in his first year. But, maybe if he sees this job opening like with hindsight, who knows, right? I'm not going to forecast that. Number four here, Sean. So I go Otzelberger, I go Odom. Number four here, Sean. I'm going to go Mike Malone, right? I think that it could be outside the box enough where they'll take a chance on it. And then number five here, Sean. I'm going to go Nate Oates, just because if there's ever a chance for him to leave Bama, this would be the job. Out of the conference, blue blood. Duke's not opening anytime soon. I know you referenced the other Midwest blue blood with a darker shade of blue, but does Nate Oates wait for that chance? Does he want to get burned by Bill Self picking someone else if he dreams of coaching at one of these blue bloods in air quotes? So that's my top five.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of days, Joe. I would think that this thing will probably be wrapped up next week at this time. We're doing this Tuesday night. We're firing this video out right away. I would think that, Byington, a lot of these coaches are already done, Joe, but the few that aren't, you're going to want to wait at least to take a crack at them. Nate Oates is still playing, hopefully for your sake, not for much longer. And then you talk about, McCasland, who is done at the hands of Nate Oates, and a bunch of other people. But yeah, I would say the Final Four probably takes them out of the running. Or UNC people are going to start to get a little bit impatient, and then you better get somebody if you wait till the end of the Final Four. But really interesting search here. This is sort of like the Michigan football job, Joe, in what it wasn't on the radar of potentially being open all year. It sort of materialized really quickly at the end, and then you have a million different names, and then somebody's going to come up with it. But extremely interesting UNC job here. If another job opens that's big, the one that we've been hinting at, we're certainly going to jump on here again. But in terms of UNC talk, the next time that we're going to see everybody is probably when somebody is hired. So, Joe, unless you got anything else to add, we're going to wrap it up.
Dom, one last thing. This could be domino number one, or it could be the final domino, but I think it's the middle domino. I think more dominoes are about to fall very quickly.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.